Let's just rip it, baby.
This is EposVox.
The medium often dictates the message. That doesn't help me.
And if you have been into technology at all, you've probably come across him on YouTube. He's known around the town as the stream professor, but I would argue he's also an editing professor. So naturally, when he reached out to me and said he wanted to come on the show, I was stoked. Guys, this episode was great. We talked about his obsession with the analog world.
I cannot stand, any pre-made VHS effect pack or whatever.
We talked about his switch from Resolve to Premiere.
I used to have a desk full of macro pads and second, third keyboards of macros. And
we talked about his for-creator music company.
We called it backing track, which is a bit of a generic name because backing track is the term for that kind of music.
We got super nerdy about studio spaces.
I don't want to see your empty white desk and a fake plant and tell me that you work all day.
And we went in deep and nerdy on his ideology behind gamer hotkeys for editing.
And that has sped up my workflow a ton.
This episode was great, and I hope you guys enjoy it. EposVox, dude, oh my gosh, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I am so excited to nerd out with you. I mean, not that it's a competition, and I don't want to offend anyone who's been on the show before, but I think we might have the nerdiest conversation yet, which just has me pumped to the nth degree. Yeah. No, in all fairness, everyone's been great and everyone's been super nerdy, which is what we're here for. So welcome to the show. And yeah, just so excited to get into it.
Thank you for having me on.
To kick us off, I do want to do a rapid fire round because I think that this is always my favorite, just to kind of ask quick questions. Historically, I've struggled to keep us on track, to keep it short, but I want to say, let's try to have these be quick fire answers as best as possible, and then we will certainly circle back on this stuff. So even the first question,
okay,
what is your NLE of choice? I'm sure we're going to have lots to talk about there, but let's start with that one.
DaVinci Resolve.
Yes, great answer. Question number 2, favorite editing snack when you're sitting down, getting into flow state?
Doritos.
Oh, good one. Okay.
The worst choice, because you got to keep cleaning your hands.
What do you do for dirty fingers? You got any secrets for us? Because I love Doritos.
No, I don't have one on me. So I'm a relatively new dad. He's about to turn 4, but that feels new given it's all pandemic time. We use my kids' old burp cloths as fabric napkins instead of just buying them, and so I usually just have one ready for the session and then switch them out or whatever, and it's gross, but it keeps the keyboard clean and everything nice.
No, that is super genius. New dad with a 4-year-old. I'm the newer dad with the 2.5-year-old, and dude, you're a veteran in my eyes. You've been through it.
Doesn't feel like it, but yeah.
Next question. Can you play an instrument or instruments? Which I think is a good question because I think I have lots of music questions later.
I can make vague music sounds with a keyboard. I don't know a whole lot of actual music theory, but I took a piano class in high school and played a bunch, and I can do the Legend of Zelda Song of Storms or whatever and do some ambient stuff.
Okay, next rapid fire question. When you are laying down an edit for a video, and maybe this depends on what kind of video it is, but do you usually prefer to pick the music first or last? Do you have any of the hills there that you die on? I'm curious.
Most of it comes last. Sound design is just one of the things I'm weakest at. So usually I'm fitting the track to the edit for certain things, especially with the kind of content I make. If I'm doing something like a gameplay montage or something where it's the music is part of the feel, then it's 100% first. But in most of my day-to-day videos, it's basically an afterthought, unfortunately.
Next question. Do you prefer coffee, tea, hot chocolate, or none?
None. I drink water and a singular soda that has a small amount of caffeine in it that gets me going, but otherwise it's just water.
And that soda has to be sun-kissed, or it
yes.
could be any type of soda? It's got to be sun-kissed.
Just that.
Nice. Good choice. You've obviously got quite the studio setup. Do you rock a big old pair of speakers when you're editing, or headphones?
Not big. I've got PreSonus Aris 4-inch studio monitors, so they're decent, but they're not big old, music production monitors or anything. They're just enough to get the right phase and sound great, and that's all I need. Pop in headphones if I want to make sure stuff is really right. But
sweet.
I always run into the issue. I have a million monitors, so getting big speakers positioned around everything is always a nightmare. So,
do you have a current favorite song or artist out of curiosity right now? I like asking music questions.
For editing purposes or just listening?
If you have both, let's do both. But I was thinking listening. So
for listening, I guess at the moment would be a band called Loveless. Just kind of pop rocky. Big picture would probably be like Paramore. For editing, we actually have our own music label that I do for creators and streamers and stuff, and so that's pretty much what I use exclusively at this point. It's called Backing Track.
Next super fun question. Are you able to tell me how many camcorders you currently own?
Accurately, probably not. I just got a new one too, so it's more than 10.
More than 10. Okay. Awesome. I love that answer.
I can't say I've tallied them, but I can like see at least like 8, and I know there's a handful more than that, so more than 10.
Okay, and then my last rapid fire question. How long have you been able to grow such an epic beard?
It's hilarious that you say that, because honestly, only like the past 3 years probably.
Really? Okay, yeah.
I have, where you talked about in middle school, you were the one who sprouted up quicker. I was the late bloomer, and I spent forever. I could only grow like a porn mustache, and I hated that, but I hated how I looked without facial hair. And it took until pandemic times where I just kind of gave up for a little bit. And it's like, whoa, there's a beard now. It's only been a few years.
And it's so funny you said that about the beard, because I literally did the exact same thing where I tried to go everything, and to this day I still can't grow a good beard. So the mustache came in with the pandemic and then has stuck ever since. So all right, man. Well, hey, that was rapid fire. That you are on a roll today. I think you have won the fastest rapid fire. I'm going to definitely have to come up with some kind of trophy for you. I do want to ask you first and foremost, and I am curious, we as human beings love summarizing, drawing connections, relating things to things that we know, right? Like we watch the new Dune movie and we say, oh, this is like this, Lord of the Rings, whatever, something. We try to kind of draw relations. You are in so many different spheres that I would be curious to know if you had to try to come up with an EposVox type summary for yourself, like elevator pitch to someone who doesn't know you. Like, what do you say, man? Because you're everywhere. You're in everything.
It's always so hard. I have spent most of my career resisting being put in a box because I just hate the idea of like being known as one thing. And so at the moment, I embrace the stream professor branding as like my main work because it's what primarily pays the bills and what I'm mostly known for and whatever. But that was after years of resisting it because I was doing OBS courses for years and years, and I'd always get comments being like, "You're the OBS teacher, the OBS professor, whatever." And I was just like, I don't want to be the X guy. I want to. I do so many things, but it's easier. It's easier to just kind of squeeze into that and then be like, but I also do all these other things. And then my elevator pitch is always a fumbled mouthful of, I'm a video editor, but also I make tech videos, education videos for the internet. And they're like, whoa, that's cool. My kid wants to make YouTube. And I'm like, yeah, maybe don't, but okay. Make sure they stay in school.
Yeah, make sure they keep being educated. Again, I'd love to hear more of your thought process there on not wanting to be put in a box, because it's very tough because it feels like when you get put into a box, you get put into a corner and it just feels less creative. But from I hate the word, but I can't think of a different one. From a branding perspective, it's so great, right? Like people know you as something. And I think too, and I felt this a lot, I've actually been embracing the box lately because the box kind of is the title and thumbnail, right? But then within that box, especially in my case, like it's like editing. It's like, well, man, that could be anything, right? And I think that's kind of similar with you. It's like, well, streaming, it's like, well, okay, maybe that is kind of a box, but that's cameras, that's editing, that's music, right? So it's, I don't know. I'm curious if you have any more thoughts there on that, like where your head is at.
I spent a long time resisting it, and I was trying to just be on my main channel a general tech channel. But realistically, like everything could be tied back, like you said, to content creation or streaming or whatever, like in terms of just finding an application for it. For me, it just comes from like, I get bored of stuff really easily. Like I have ADHD and I get like hyper focused on specific subjects. And so for like 2 months at a time, I'll be like all in on just caring about retro gaming and gaming accessories and upscalers and stuff. And then I'll care about art and photography and whatever else. And then a new encoder update will release. And then suddenly I'm back on track on streaming and stuff. And so it's really hard to feel like I'm trapped just doing the one thing because I will get bored of it. And I don't like, to me, the flexibility of doing a bunch of different things is how you kind of avoid burnout. Like doing the same, like I have a box, like for a couple years during the pandemic, because it was doing so well with everyone working from home and stuff, I was doing like a dedicated capture card review every week or every other week. And it was like, you know, I have a formula for it. I have X things I test for. It's something that basically I'm the only one doing this kind of testing on the internet. So like I felt a responsibility for it. And it was the thing I became known for. But like it was so creatively depleting because I wasn't doing any of my ideas. I wasn't pursuing any of my other interests. And so now I just have a box of like to-do stuff that's built up for a couple years of those kinds of things because I don't want to just make the same video over and over, especially when they don't perform super well. It's like this weird, like I almost, the Stream Professor brand was super powerful. Like once I finally embraced it, it was like a switch flipped and just suddenly everyone who like knew I was an authority in this space but didn't like say anything were suddenly like, okay, let's have you talk at this thing. We're going to recognize you for this. And I was just like, where were you 3 weeks ago before I said this? But like it was powerful, but it also meant that like people only expected that, and anything else I did away from that, they're like, but why not talk about this? And it's just like, it's not interesting every day of the week. It's not. And so I am trying to branch out while still, like, I still believe in the power of branding. And so that's why if you look at any of my other channels, they're not just EposVox 2 or my backup channel, Smile. It's very hardcore branded for the things that they are, because I'm addicted to brand names and like cool domain names and things like that. And so I come from an era where handles were all the rage and no one used their name anywhere. So I'm still very much in that mindset, but I got to find ways to kind of let myself breathe a little bit without being trapped doing the same video every day, because it just gets kind of exhausting.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So many questions spawning from all of what you just said. I think real quick, I just want to take us on a 2-second side tangent. I am curious where EposVox originated from. Like, what was the backstory on that? Because you're right. I mean, I kind of come from that generation, but I didn't really start doing this until I was like, I'll just use my name. But
yeah. So my older channels were older elite speak kind of usernames that were super cringy. And I reached a point in college where like I needed to break away from my older channels because they were dead, so to speak, in that like I had done a million different things and built up subscribers from like collabs and giveaways and whatever. And like I was starting to see what hadn't yet really been published about YouTube with regards to like click-through rates and like the way the algorithm recommends stuff based on how your initial wave of subscribers recommend stuff. Like none of that was really known yet, but I was starting to see it. Like you have all these inactive subscribers that YouTube tries pushing a video to, and when they don't watch it, your video doesn't go anywhere. And I was like, I need to start fresh. I need something that's going to be less cringy as I'm in college and an adult now and whatever. And I wanted something that sounded fancy. And I was really attracted to the 2-syllable, 1-syllable naming cadence. So EposVox, like there were a bunch of channels at the time that were named things like that like it just felt really snappy and cool. I had a couple buddies, we were trying to brainstorm ideas, and he wound up suggesting that, which is EposVox, which is actually a kind of reverse broken Latin version of Epic Voice. When I first started on YouTube, especially with broken microphones and puberty and whatever, like one of my claims to fame was I had a really deep voice. At this point, I've kind of worn it out, and I have convinced myself to talk more regularly. But at the time, I was like going all in on it once my voice changed, and I was just like, hey, everybody, I'm EposVox, and blah, 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 and like really pushing it. And I think, honestly, I did some damage, but like that was my thing. And so it was Epic Voice, EposVox, but still vague enough to not be like whatever. And it just kind of stuck. And even back then, I was still doing gaming videos. Like it was still not a transition to tech, but it was just like a general name that didn't have numbers in it, that wasn't cringy, I'm gonna own you in a video game kind of name. And I just kind of stuck with it.
Sweet. Oh, I love that. Well, and to circle back on the branding piece, I do think too, one thing that you excel at, which is definitely a starting point for a lot of editing specific questions that I have is the brand that you subtly have, right? It's not the name, it's not the title, it's whatever is kind of that analog, retro, VHS type feel, which again, I think is because you use a lot of analog tools, which is fantastic. But also I'm curious, like, again, about the editing of this and some thoughts on that. And I guess just starting question there is, I see that as a huge part of the brand. Walk me through that, and I'm sure we'll shoot into all kinds of nerdiness on the editing of it. But what was the choice there, and what continues to be the choice there?
I mean, it kind of always was there, like building up over the years. There was a time where I tried to do the like modern corporate thing, and I just didn't. Like, it was easy, but I didn't really like it. But like, I've always had my roots in analog stuff. Like, my first videos and vlogs I was making was on handycams and just sharing the tapes with family or burning them to DVDs or whatever, and trying to capture our old consoles with like TV tuners and things like that. And so like, it's my roots, it's where I come from. And it's also, to me, especially as someone who teaches like the act of content creation and using the technology for it, there's so much insight to be gained from understanding how we did things before. And I don't think you need to know every detail like I do and like all the, you know, the granularity of it, but appreciating like not only the effort that was required before and the lack of reach that anyone had, but also just like the evolution of how the cameras and the capture software or hardware and like all these things works really gives you insight into the privilege we have now to just turn on a video call and do this, but also like how some of it works, because I am one of those old man yells at clouds that believes that when you're brought up when everything's an app and you don't know how to troubleshoot anything, that you're not really learning how anything works. And then when things don't work right, you don't have any experience or tools to figure that out because you were never brought up with it. And so to me, it's both just aesthetically. I consider myself a child of the 80s. I was born in the early 90s, but you know, culture is always like, there's always a few years of overlap, and my parents were very much all about the 80s with the big hair and the 80s big hair metal and all that. And so that was hugely influential on my culture. I never stopped watching VHS tapes. All of this was like ingrained into my being coming up. And so as much as I love fancy 4K video and cinema cameras and whatever, like, it's cooler to me to integrate as much of the old stuff as possible so we just don't lose sight of where we came from. And like, it's become a trend recently, and so I always get self-conscious about things where it's like, wow, I just kind of look like I'm in the bandwagon now, even though people were asking why the heck I would do this 8 years ago. Like, I even had brands be like, you know, your videos would really improve if you went for a more like corporate clean aesthetic. And I'm just like, I would rather die. I'm not going to do that. And now everyone's like, let's use the fake camcorder app on my phone and the slap black bars on everything. And it's just like, no.
Totally. No. And I think that that's cool. And that's kind of why I wanted to ask, because yes, it's so good. And I figured you would say as much, right? That it really truly comes from the historical piece, the part of, you know, what we grew up with, and keeping that alive. And yeah, I mean, there's a million different offshoots here about just everything that's back in style. But I guess too, I am curious because, I mean, you do a lot of mixed stuff, and like you said, you use modern cameras. I mean, you are adding some of that in the edit, right? And I think if I've done my research correctly, you've even made some assets to help with that. Like, is that true?
Yes. Yeah. So I went through, I cannot stand like any pre-made VHS effect pack or whatever, because I think they just like, I think it's true of any emulation of analog stuff, is it kind of misses the point of kind of the organic randomness of analog, and like the fact that it was a video signal that got degraded. But also a lot of it, like, it comes down to application. You can't slap a filter on an iPhone footage that has like all the dynamic range squished in and everything in focus and be like, yeah, it's going to look like a VHS tape, because the cameras didn't look anything like that back then. But I do think that there's a lot to be like improved on in any of the like paid filters for like VHS emulation or whatever. Like I have the Red Giant stuff and it's useful in certain situations, but it's not a true replacement. And so I spent a good couple weeks, like I would literally record like a take and print that to a tape and then capture it back and just sit there side by side in the Resolve color tab, just like playing with the effects to match like and keyframe like the effects of the color separation and the noise generation and whatever, just so I had something to easily kind of use in place. Like there's like I just recently released a video where I featured a lot of older footage that I published to YouTube back in the day and whatever, but something that happens is, and this isn't to be like a flex, but like after a certain point, all of my footage and videos looked good enough that you wouldn't know that they were old. Like they still hold up. I had my quality and export settings and everything good enough that like looking back at it, you would never know that the video is almost 10 years old because it just looks like an okay version of my videos today. And so that would be a scenario where like I slapped my VHS pack I generated for Resolve together on top of it just to kind of convey that it's old footage, just to help kind of sell it, because otherwise it'd be like, what do you mean you didn't just record that video like 3 weeks ago on your phone and whatever. And so it helps. It's a tool versus a substitute for real style or substance, I guess.
You literally were taking new footage, burning it to tape, watching it through, and then side by side actually making the emulation tools that you're using. Okay. Oh my gosh, dude, that's so good. Well, and I love that because again, like looking at what you've done, it is definitely like you can tell that meticulous effort was there because, and maybe this is a fun, super nerdy question, like the analog effect in DaVinci leaves quite a bit to be desired. And I was like, I wonder what he's doing there.
Yeah. One of the versions of my preset or whatever, I hate these words. It makes me sound like a salesman, but like one of the versions of it uses that for like one of the tiny effects it includes, because like some of the things they give you in the analog effect is kind of neat, but the presets for it are all just like really cheesy and like gimmicky. And so one of the versions of it uses that effect for just like, I think one of the like grain effects it does on the side of the frame. I was like, I really like that and I don't feel like recreating it, so I'll just slap that in on one of the nodes. But yeah, otherwise I don't like using the pre-made effects. And like if I had my own way, I'd just record all of my videos to tape and capture them back off and then upload them that way. But there's a lot of obviously like screen capture details or quality comparisons or whatever where people would not be too happy with that. So you got to compromise on your creativity for the sake of views sometimes, but you got to find a happy medium.
Well, okay, and that was my next question is like, where do you or how do you tackle that mix? Like when you're, because like, so in a perfect world, you would do it all, but also that's a ton more work. So like, is it strictly because of the audience that you do a mixture, or is it also a time savings thing? I'm curious about that.
I mean, probably both. For me, it's about like the right tool for the right job. Like I make a lot of videos where I need to show things in a specific way, regardless of my ambition. So like if I do a capture card review, I have to show the footage completely untouched, even if I can make it look better, because or like a microphone, like I have to have at least some of the video be unprocessed and like just the raw sound of the microphone, because that's the point of the like demo and comparison. Even if I'm like, here's the 3 steps to make it sound amazing and everyone can do this and here's my settings, like I still have to include that. And so it's about choosing the right tool for the job. And so when I have the ability to like express myself creatively or do a cool scene with it or whatever, I will do as much fun analog stuff as possible. But like, I also have to field a bajillion comments of people who don't get it in the first place and are like, well, why is it so crunchy? What's all this noise? Why is it so flickery and whatever? And so there's the whole editing mantra of like, let the story dictate your edit or whatever. And I don't do a lot of narrative work, so that doesn't fully apply, but it's still the same, like choosing a tool that's going to get the job done in the way that people expect. And so it's a matter of finding like the fun times, or like if it's just me on camera and you're like, the way I look on camera isn't the point of the video, then I can have more fun with it. Whereas if it's like a camera review, then I need to leave it as like clean and normal as I can. That kind of stuff.
Oh, here's the new Nikon Z8. instead of showing you what the footage actually looks like, here's it with a big old crunchy VHS effect on it. Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And that's for everything in the whole creative process, in my opinion. Like it should be intentional for the most part. And if it isn't, it's probably for the sake of being creative and finding something that ultimately could have intentionality behind it. And I think you're right. I think there's a lot of people that definitely throw. I mean, I've certainly been guilty of this. Throw stuff on this that probably wasn't the right fit because it's a sign of the times. I mean, a great example. In fact, I was like the last guy I was talking to on the show, Schaefer. We talked about it a whole bunch, where it's just like 2:3:5 aspect ratio with black bars was like the thing. And, you know, Pete and Maddie and all the Toronto boys were all about it and everyone was doing it. And it's like, it certainly wasn't always the choice, you know? And then nowadays it's kind of shifting to like 4:3 and kind of getting into that analog style. It's coming back. And in some cases it makes total sense. Like with what you're doing, it's your style. It comes from real historical background, but it's not always the right choice. And yeah, it's so interesting.
That's what kills me about a lot of the pre-made stuff is it's like people will go record something even in vertical on their phone and then slap like a one of those camcorder apps on it or something and be like, look, it's nostalgic. And I'm like, what's nostalgic about the thing you filmed yesterday on your phone? Like there's no nostalgic meaning here. It doesn't make it nostalgic just because you pretended that it looks old. Like that's not and it sounds so like up your own smoke about it, but it is like you do learn over time to make decisions based on why you're doing it in the first place. And I think the CinemaScope and 120 FPS slow-mo coffee montages is a very good example of that. But it's also like the medium often dictates the message with what you're doing. Like anyone wanting to be a part of that crowd of what I used to call coffee vloggers, or like they're making these cinematic stories about their day-to-day nothing. Like even if it doesn't really serve any story, it's kind of the expected aesthetic. And so if you want to appeal to those viewers, even if maybe I might argue that's not the right call, like if that's what you want to do, then you gotta kind of look like that. Or if you want to be, Casey Neistat in 2016, then you need to have your gorilla pod and be one wheeling around New York and whatever, and or LA. And like a lot of the times, and that's the problem with posting to specific web platforms, is like you kind of have to cater what you're doing to the audience and the platform, even if it doesn't make sense realistically. It's just what people expect in the moment.
But to get through, hopefully, to someone today, and I think, again, you're a great example of this, stay true to yourself and your style. And maybe it's not today, maybe it's not in a year, maybe it's not in 6 years, but chances are, do what you love, make it how you want to make it, and somehow the world will probably find it and love it, just maybe not today, right? Like you're saying, like, oh, this is so crunchy, this is so analog, and nowadays everyone's like, whoa, cool style, dude, this is awesome. And you're like, this is like my childhood.
And in 5
I don't
years,
know.
They're going to be like, wow, you're still doing that? We moved on, man.
We've moved on, exactly. So I think the takeaway here is just do you. Do what you want and don't. Yeah, I think there's a lot of pride to be taken in doing that over just following the trends. And I say that coming from a place of following a lot of trends in my life. And for the first time, feel like maybe I've reached the point where it's like, oh, I see that now. If I can help anyone get there a little faster, I think that is a great thing.
Like, yeah, absolutely. My biggest thing is I want to be able to look back at my body of work and not see a ebb and flow of external trends and be like, oh yeah, that was that phase and that was that phase. I want it to be phases of things that I was interested in or learning and wanting to do. I don't want it to be, there's when I tried to be Pete, there's when I tried to be Casey, there's when I tried to be Linus. Like, I want it to just be, here's what I was interested in and trying to do at the time. And so it takes a lot because you do have to cater to trends in some capacity to, chase success or whatever. But like, yeah, you got to keep your true vision, whatever that is. And it may take you forever to figure out what that is too. And that's okay.
And because everything's derivative, there's a good chance that it's similar to someone else's and it may or may not be trendy at the time. And like you're saying, basically just do what speaks to you. And that's, man, I think that's the way to go. Oh, very cool, man. Not editing related, and I love it. This is why I love the show, because I think that these things are all so important to what you make. But I would be upset with myself if we didn't cover. I'm always, and I know the people love this too, but I'm always curious to ask people some of the nitty gritty about the software side of what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I got to ask, and I know, again, if I've done my research properly, you were all about Premiere and then have gone to DaVinci.
Definitely did your research.
Yeah. So I'm curious again, and I've got plenty to say on this, so who knows how long we'll go here, but I am curious to hear about that transition, how you're feeling about DaVinci, and I'm sure I'll have 1,000 questions. So, walk me through the EposVox editing thought process right now with DaVinci Resolve.
So I started with Movie Maker, capturing my tapes and doing whatever, and even making like pretty standard gaming videos with Movie. Like you could go pretty far after a certain point once you knew what you were doing with it. And then transition to Vegas at one point because that was what everyone on YouTube used because it was easy to get on the 7Cs. And then when I started college, they provided licenses for CS6 of Adobe. And there was no way I could say no to that. And to me, that was, even though it's a bit overinflated how much it was used, it was like, this is what they use in movie studios and TV networks or whatever. And so I was just like, I'm going to learn Premiere. And I used it for probably like 8 years straight. And I was hooked on it. Like, it was better, obviously, than anything else I'd used before. It was capable of so much. I had everything custom. I used to have a desk full of macro pads and second, third keyboards of macros and auto hotkey scripts and whatever to like automate my flow for it. I had panels on every monitor from it. Like, I was all in. And at one point in time, I would have told you, and I'm pretty sure I did publicly say a few times, like, there is nothing on earth that could make me switch from Premiere Pro. Turns out there was a lot. It started with the switch to CC, Creative Cloud. I kind of regret switching after a certain point, but I could have gone back to CS6, but I didn't want to. Like, the thing that finally convinced me to, because I could have just kept using my CS6 license indefinitely from my college and never paid for the software. There's potential implications there, but it would have been fine. But what convinced me finally to switch was in CC, they introduced a automatic audio sync alignment feature that was not in CS6. And it was, you could just put your audio and your video on your track, right click it, auto sync. And it was like, whoa, I don't have to spend forever lining up my frames, which at the time I found really difficult. These days I do it every day and it's fine. But I was just like, whoa, that's going to save me so much time. And so I paid, at the time it was $15 a month. I had a student discount. So it was it was doable. And I was just like, I'll switch. But then that was probably 2014. Over the next 4 years, we got tons of amazing features, but performance and stability just was in free fall. It reached the point, even today, on a fresh Windows install, after I install a couple extra programs on my computer, if I go to make a new project and import stuff, it can sometimes just hang and freeze for no reason. And I'm just like, this is just... it was becoming such a headache, but I was so enmeshed in my macro automated workflow, presets, effects, whatever, that I thought was saving me time, that I was like, there's no way I was going to switch. But in 2018, I made the classic YouTuber decision to buy my first cinema camera. And that was a Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro. That was a kind of ridiculous decision. I learned a lot from it, though. But of course, it came with a license for Resolve Studio, which I'd never even heard of outside of brief mentions for coloring. And it came with a RAW format. It was originally Cinema DNG, but eventually, fairly quickly they released the BRAW update, a format that wasn't usable in Premiere. There was a plugin for it, but you weren't actually going to edit a video with it. It was, and I hated Lumetri. I never understood color, and it turns out it was because Lumetri was that bad. And then the whole I never even knew about the gamma shift issue on export that everyone has like pre-bait export lux for or whatever, because I couldn't wrap my head around color because I hated it that much. I started slowly learning Resolve, and there were certain videos that I would still make in Premiere because I had like all my automated stuff for. So like my microphone comparisons, I had all my like text presets and stuff. And so I'd pop back to Premiere to do that. But eventually it got so unstable that I was just like, and Resolve was just so fast at playing everything. And everything was moving to HEVC codecs, which Premiere could not handle very well. And like eventually I just switched. And like I have never been happier. And I don't have any of my automated shortcuts. I don't need them. I edit so much quicker. Everything's so much more stable. I have, in recent years, had more stability issues than I would like to admit. But it's still way better than anytime I try to pop it. Like, I still have a couple MoGraph templates for Premiere that I just, like, export out of Premiere with Alpha and then bring back into Resolve. And, like, every time I open it, I'm just like...
Here we are.
And so I've been in Resolve full-time since 2019. It took me about a year to switch full-time. And I could have done it sooner, but like I've been there full-time, and like I don't look back. Like I said, I've got a couple MoGraph templates in Premiere that I still use just because I literally can't recreate them in Fusion, but like otherwise it's my bread and butter now.
That is the piece I'm always the most fascinated in, and what I try to really understand in this show to the best of my ability is exactly what you said. Like, it's so trendy right now to make the I switch to Resolve video. I think that's maybe died down a little bit because now everyone's like, oh yeah, of course, like that's just where we're at. But what I really think is fascinating is the literal day-to-day pieces that matter, right? Like, what is it that you're using that genuinely is like, oh, I started using this and I didn't even realize how good it could be. The audio syncing thing is an example for me coming from Final Cut, where I was like, oh, this is like Resolve does this with a button click and I can see it visually. And, you know, like all kinds of that stuff is fascinating to me, especially because I came from Final Cut. So I didn't have the stability issues. For me, It was very exploratory. And like you said, I had the license. The color grading piece was certainly one that opened my eyes, where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I don't hate color. Maybe I just need to use a tool
built for color.
Maybe I just need to get out the paintbrush instead of the hammer and nails, you know, like I didn't realize that that's how that could be. And that is what I find fascinating. So like you said, there was, you mentioned the color, you mentioned the stability. Like, what other things have you found in an EposVox workflow that it's just like, wow, who knew? What are some of those?
So for me, like, it's not even a specific feature. Like, the color grading was a big part, and obviously starting to shoot raw video, I needed to learn to color grade, which was a lot. My skin tone is not picked up properly by most cameras, and so there was a lot there. But for me, it was purely the timeline performance. Like, I had gotten so used, like I had made multiple videos on workflows to like pre-render your timeline, or like I had an entire encoding server dedicated to converting every piece of footage I captured or ingested to Cineform or DNxHR to have faster timeline speeds, because everything was so slow to play back, even at like 1/16th quality or whatever the lowest in Premiere's playback menu was. Like, everything started getting so slow, even though my computers were getting faster. You know, I was doing hardware reviews and like PC build reviews and things like that. So I was getting top of the line hardware, and things just like kept getting slower. And it was when I finally committed to doing like full videos on my Resolve timeline, and I had H.264 camera footage, H.265 OBS footage, B-RAW camera footage, like all these like mixed sources, because I shoot with a bunch of different stuff for every video. And like everything just played smoothly. I didn't need proxies. I didn't need to lower my resolution. I could slap the full 4.6K RAW out of my camera on the timeline at 4.6K if I wanted to for some bizarre reason. And it just went. And like noise reduction or a couple specific effects might slow it down. But like I can sit here, I can even do it in the background here. Like it's probably not gonna do it for this video because it's been sitting here for a while, but like I could sit here and like scrub faster than I'd ever seen Premiere scrub in my entire life. And it was just that kind of like, how can it be so fast? And it made me realize all of those macros and automation things I had set up to save me time were basically like a crutch because I was wasting so much time just waiting on the program to do its thing. And so between that, the faster render times, like they just have such a good graphics card acceleration engine on Resolve that I just... Premiere is built for old cheese grater Mac Pros with a bunch of CPU cores and ProRes video, because that is what the movie studio's workflow were. You ingest everything to ProRes, only ProRes, like Avid. Avid used to only work with one codec because that was all you were going to use. It was built for that workflow, and they have tried to update it over time, but at its core, it was still built for that workflow. And Resolve, when they added NLE capabilities to it, they're like, why don't we decode everything on all these high-end graphics cards all these people have now and do it that way? And it's just like, that was the killer feature, was purely just being able to edit my footage without stalls or like lag or whatever. And obviously, like, I have increased the power of the footage I edit these days, so some of that performance has kind of gone back downhill just because of, you know, my camera only shoots in 8K if I want the full capabilities, so like I'm editing 8K footage and like weird stuff like that. But it's still night and day. Like I see every once in a while there's like a movie timeline where they're editing a whole movie, you know, just the final cut. They don't do final cut. They don't do the color or whatever, VFX or anything in Premiere, obviously, but like they'll do the final assembly in Premiere. And I'm like, I do not know how you have a 2-hour long timeline with clips from like a bajillion different sources and actually export a whole movie from that and not have...
Totally. It blows my mind. I'm with you. It's truly incredible. Well, okay, this is a super niche question because, again, I'm just not super familiar with Premiere. Like, all of what I know is from asking questions and hearing from other people. Like, Premiere also didn't have any kind of timeline render cache type functionality either, right? Or did it?
So it does, but you have to like manually trigger. Like the big thing, so there was this wave. I don't know if you were around for this. It was around 2014, 2013 maybe, where a bunch of the big tech channels at the time suddenly all switched to editing on MacBooks because Final Cut had the background rendering with the Intel acceleration on it. And it was just like, I can just open my timeline and leave it for a sec, and it's going to pre-cache everything, and then it runs super smooth. And so they had like their desktops or their Mac Pros, and they're like, I'm editing on a MacBook now. And it was this whole wave of everyone switching for Final Cut. Neither Resolve kind of does, but it sucks. But like neither Resolve nor Premiere had that specific feature. But with Premiere, you could like set in and out points and just say, render the timeline. And so you would set a preview format like ProRes or something, and it would render that chunk. So if you had a super effects heavy thing and you wanted to actually see how it would play out before you committed to it, you could render that out and then it would go faster. And there was a really cool workflow where you could just set your previews to be full res. So you weren't playing back lower res previews. Like it was the full final render, and then you could use those to export. So you could have like 30-second export times if you had already rendered your whole timeline because it didn't need to re-render anything. It would just compress it or whatever. But it did not have the background like proxy generation or caching or anything like Final Cut does.
Yeah, and again, that's, I think, why Final Cut has always had such a nice taste in my mouth, which I think is what a lot of what you're getting at is there is nothing that can overcome just the speed at which you think and want to watch something. And the fact that Resolve is the best at doing that right now is monumental to making me want to create anything, right? Like, sure, you can have 1,000 hotkeys to do something, but if I can't click over there and immediately see it and my brain gears down for just a second, it's taken me out of it. And that's why I've always loved Final Cut. You said render cache sucks on Resolve. What was that thought?
I hate it. I used to try to use it and I just keep it completely turned off now. Like, you can set it up, but okay, so my big complaints are, especially even compared to Premiere, are first, it doesn't render to like a video file. So with Premiere, if you rendered a chunk of a timeline, it's rendering out each chunk as like basically just ProRes movies. And so you can do something with that. With Resolve, it is just basically a bunch of their own format of still frames. Like, you're not going to find the files, you're not going to be able to do anything with them. And every teeny tiny, if you just look at the timeline sideways, it's going to be like, oh, gotta ditch those cache and start over again. It doesn't keep them. Whereas with Premiere, you could like render a chunk of the timeline, and as long as you didn't modify the clips in that chunk, that preview was rendered. It was set in stone. You were good. Whereas Resolve, I can have, I can set up the red bar and have it go like halfway through my timeline and turn green. If I even just like click on a clip towards the end of the timeline, it resets it all to red and starts over. That's not useful to me.
Yes.
That doesn't help me. Like, yes, technically that would help me for playing back the timeline if I just waited hours for it to finish and then hit play at the start. But like that, tangibly, there isn't a whole lot of use for that feature. And I don't understand why they do it this way. And frankly, I've gotten to the point where like I used to have some issues. There were some driver issues with NVIDIA cards for a few years there where like even in Resolve, I was having render crashes. And so my workaround was to render cache the whole timeline and then use that for export, just like I did in Premiere. But I reached a point where certain effects and stuff would just never render the cache in the first place. And so my preferred way to do it is I don't keep render cache on at all. I don't think it provides me any value at this point. And I will just nest specific sequences or clips or whatever in a compound clip and render that in place. And that has been a lifesaver. So there are plenty of effects where like it can either cause a hiccup on export, or I just want to be able to watch how it plays out, and I just render that in place. And then not only does that make it easier when I'm editing, but then when I export, it uses that to export and doesn't have to do the hard work a second time. And so that workflow is amazing. But the default like timeline render cache is the most nonsense conceived workflow I have seen in an editor. And I feel like they squinted when they looked at what Final Cut does and was like, we can do that, and then just like did something completely different.
No, and I love so much that we can talk about this, because I don't think I've ever had anyone else where I've had this conversation who could relate to that. Because yeah, in Final Cut, it was always so good at like wherever you were editing, it always prioritized that first. And then if you change something, it doesn't do it all over again. It's just that piece. And yeah, like you said, it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to drag this text one more frame to the left. And then you look at the right of your timeline and everything goes red again. And you're just like, ugh.
And like, it's supposed to have a smart cache system, and like you can set priorities on different clips. And like, I don't find it helps me with anything again, unless I'm just going to leave my computer for hours and let it figure it out and then not click on the wrong thing when I come back. I don't know. I don't get it. I would much rather use, you can generate proxies, you can set a timeline proxy resolution, you can generate optimized media. Like there's so many tools available in Resolve that the render cache is just not even a consideration at this point.
Well, and like you said, thankfully, it's so well optimized that you actually don't even really have to depend on that. And you're right. I think I've turned it on so little lately. The few times that I have, I'm trying to even remember what I was doing. But it was just like, okay, it worked this time, and I just wanted to kind of see that part, and then maybe I even turned it back off. I can't remember after that rendered or whatever the case was. So yeah, there's so many other ways, and that render in place idea is fantastic. And yeah, for anyone who doesn't know about that, go check out videos on that. That's super powerful to allow you to see something, because that's always been too, like from a philosophical standpoint as an editor. And again, a lot of this is rooted in my roots in Final Cut, but it's like, I need to see it. I need to know in real time, frame by frame, what I am getting. That is so important for the ideology of how I edit. And I think some people are able to kind of almost have Dune blue eye future sight with that, with like Premiere, where they're like, yeah, I think this is, I know what this is going to be. It's like, I don't operate that way. It's like, I have to see it for real.
No, I am the same way. There have been so many videos where like an effect just doesn't turn out how I wanted, and I don't understand why. And it's purely because I just couldn't play it back in real time to know that it looked like that. And I just had to trust. And eventually you reach a point where you just kind of got to commit the video and deal. And like, it is super important to be able to see what you're working with. And even now, like there was a gaming video I made, and there was like a cool effect I had downloaded that I applied, and I didn't realize that the effect itself lowered the frame rate of the thing while it was happening. I just assumed it was playing back that way in the timeline because it was like an intense effect, and I just left it. And then I uploaded the video, and I was just like, oh, that really, like, it had a thing where it just lowered the frame rate on purpose. And I was just like, well, it's too late now, but like, I need to know that in advance. And that was one of the big things that drove me nuts with Premiere. You just like awoke a latent memory. For the longest time, I don't know if this is still an issue, in Premiere, my audio levels when I played the video in the timeline did not match what they were when I exported. And so when it comes to like background music balance, I would re-export videos like 5 times trying to get background music at like the right level, because it would sound fine in the edit and then be super loud when I played it back on YouTube or something. And it didn't make any sense. And they eventually introduced the loudness normalization of, export option and cool stuff like that, which thankfully Resolve only just implemented. But like, no matter what I did, it did not match. And it's one of those basic things of like, if you can't tell me what my audio is going to sound like while I'm editing the video, you are not doing your job. Like,
there is so much to be said too for just how powerful Fairlight is, and like what the control, like because before I got into video editing, I was all about GarageBand, Avid, or not Avid. Was it Avid? Pro Tools, GarageBand, Logic. So like having like something that looks like a real DAW to just, open up and get at is like, oh, it's so magical.
I used to be someone who would like participate in the internet arguments of like Premiere versus Resolve or whatever. And one of the things that I would defend would be like, you have this ecosystem of Photoshop and Premiere and Audition and After Effects, and they all work together and whatever, except Resolve has it all built in. Like, I've gotten to the point where I will even sometimes make thumbnails in Resolve.
Yes.
Because you can just do it. And it's so much easier to do cool text effects in a video editor than in Photoshop. And that is so messed up. But it really is.
The fact that you can just export still frame from timeline. I've been doing thumbnails in Resolve. It's so beautiful.
And just like having effectively, I mean, there's a lot I still do in After Effects because I haven't learned the workflow, or it's just not right in Fusion. But like, you effectively have After Effects built in Fusion. You've got Audition built in with Fairlight. You have Photoshop built in just because that's what it does. Like, if you convert your photo raws to the right format, you can even edit your raw photos in Resolve with the color grading tools. And so like, you have it all built in already. You don't need dynamic linking, and dynamic linking with After Effects runs horribly anyway, so you don't actually want to do it. I used to think it was so cool to just pull in an After Effects composition into my timeline and render it, until I learned it was single threaded and rendered 10 times as slow as if I just rendered it in After Effects. And I was like, no.
Well, and that's such a good point, because again, like you said, it's the ecosystem. Like, everything works together. And then like when you really break it down or go anywhere else, you're like, oh, not really. It's not really that great at everything working together. And like, yeah, in fact, I wrote a script like this week talking about all the software I use, because I kind of think it'd be interesting to talk about like, hey, if you're not in the Creative Cloud space, what do you use? And guess what? Almost all of that stuff works about as good together as the Creative Cloud does from, again, this is all speaking from what I've heard, but like, you're confirming that theory. And
I think I got us very off topic, but whatever.
Oh, and I was going to say too, along with the photo thing, which you said you're super big into photography too, which maybe, again, I love that. But the going along with the whole trends conversation as well, the glowy film vibe photos, dude, it is the easiest crap to make and Resolve and export. Like, everyone's like, how to do this in Photoshop, how to do this in Pixelmator, and I'm like, you can like add,
there's literally a halation effect built into Resolve. You just drag it on there.
3 nodes or 3 effects to a node in Resolve, and you're there, and then just export that frame as a still. And yeah, it's so funny. And of course, it's not photo editing software, but
I think one of 2 situations where I kind of got ahead, and I hate sounding like a hipster, like I liked something before it was cool, but like I got ahead of a trend in that in 2018 was when I started switching to Resolve, and we didn't really start to see the big wave of videos of I had ditched Premiere until like 2020, 2021. And by that point I was full-time in Resolve, and I'm just like, oh, catching up, I see. And then the same thing with the whole ProMist, Cinebloom, glowy halation, whatever thing, is I started doing that because most of my video sets I usually have, like I guess I do. I usually have neon or fake neon signs in the background. And I didn't like how camera lenses typically handled it. And I did a ton of research to figure this out because I loved how it looked in 80s movies and like how it looks on tape and film and whatever. And I did a ton of research to figure this out. And I went with like a subtle pro mist filter that I had not seen a single video on other than from Tiffin themselves, where you couldn't even tell the difference of like the filters they were showcasing. And I was just like, I hope this works. And I loved it. And everyone's like, whoa, how'd you do that? A couple years, or like probably closer to a year later, everyone, like Moment came out with Cinebloom and everyone's obsessed with this now. And I'm just like, oh, okay.
Totally.
And like, I'm a sucker for glowy, whatever stuff too. Like, it's part of the aesthetic, but it's like, not everything should be that. Like, if I'm going to make a video for a client, like, especially in a corporate setting or something, I'm not going to use any of this stuff. It's like, it's only for this. And if I want to show something like true to life, I'm also not going to use some of this stuff. And it's all about just like throwing it all on there. But yeah, like everyone will sell you $50 worth of Lightroom LUT packs to make your photos look like film. And then, like you said, it's like 2 nodes in Resolve, and it's just like, boom, there, built in.
That's so funny on the Pro Mist. I have a funny anecdote on that one too. Again, totally off topic, but I was using one similar to you for like a very specific purpose, and I accidentally left it on my camera. And then we were out hiking with my family, and I threw my camera in my bag, and I was just out wanting to take pictures on our hike, and I still had the filter on, and I was like, I don't have a case, because this was just like my Camelback, like my backpacking pack. So I was like, I'm just gonna leave it on because I don't really have a good place to put it, and I don't want to scratch it or whatever. And totally like got back home and like looked at the pictures, and I was like, I would really kill for some clarity right now. These all
crank up the dehaze slider and the clarity
slider. Such a bad thing. And like, I was just laughing because I was like, yep, you got to use it when you need it. And this was not that time. I want a nice sharp photo of this mountain, and I don't have it. The crazy thing to think about is that these massive sensors with all of this quality will one day look how our kids will look at those photos and go, wow, Dad, what a vibe. And you're like, dude, you have no idea. This was the sharpest, tacky, best looking thing you've ever seen. And they're like, yeah, look what I just bought. What
do you mean, Dad? My eyeballs can record 256K at 5 million frames per second. And here
plugged in, I edited it in my brain. Yeah, we're good. Okay, I've got to ask you about music stuff. Again, maybe I didn't do enough research. I thought maybe you made all of the music, but then it sounds like you own or are part of a company that makes music for creators. I want to hear about this because I've got a lot of music influence in my life and editing, and I'm curious what's going on with the music stuff.
Yeah, at the start of the pandemic, my community manager and I, who we work pretty closely on just like pitching ideas and doing goofy side projects or whatever, like he's been a musician his whole life and whatever, and like we saw a trend of like a bunch of these lo-fi beats for creators or streamers services showing up. And also it was right on the tail end of a bunch of creators getting screwed by trying to use music from like the no copyright playlists or whatever, because those libraries almost always get sold off to a record label and then everyone's videos get claimed. Or like I constantly run into, even when you pay for a lot of libraries like Epidemic, or at the time Monster Cat had a horrible policy about it. The second you stop paying, all of your videos got claimed. They have walked back some of that, but even now, like a lot of my old Epidemic stuff keeps getting claimed, and it's just like, especially on like stream VODs and stuff, it's just not worth dealing with the process of fighting it. But like we saw a gap in that there was no music that we wanted to actually like listen to or like be a part of with regards to like rock and metal and those kinds of vibes. It was all about the beats and the lo-fi stuff. And like, no disrespect to anyone who uses it, but it's all very samey to me. And it doesn't fit the vibe of every video. Like the theme of this has this whole conversation has been right tool for the right job. Not every video makes sense with do 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 just in the background. Like not everything needs to be mellow. And so he had this idea of like, what if we just made stuff? He was good friends with someone who was a one-man band called Order Through Chaos, and he's like, he would be up for just licensing his stuff to everyone. Like he self-publishes, he's not whatever. And like we used that as an experiment, like making sure setting all the flags and DistroKid and the music side of things like would keep videos safe, and like made sure he got paid for like the revenue advertising or whatever, and was just like, can this work? That worked out. And so we were like, okay, we want to just make our own music, make the music that we want in videos that I spend hours looking for and never am happy with. And we called it Backing Track, which is a bit of a generic name because like backing track is the term for like that kind of music. But I think it works. And it's focused on rock and like 80s metal style music. And we've done some branch out, like we've done our own kind of lo-fi take on things with like the nostalgia core stuff. And then we've had some good success with like synthwave, synth rock kind of stuff, but keeping it more towards like a lot of the synthwave scene is like what someone imagines the 80s sounded like, having not watched or lived through any of it. And we wanted the actual like synth rock sound that might have actually been on a movie in the 80s, like, someone getting chased by the cops during the city streets at night and all that kind of vibe. And so we've done that. We did a Halo themed album when Halo Infinite launched, and then we actually got to work with the fighting game tournament series called Evo and helped produce a track for that for the new Mortal Kombat launch. And so we've been very focused on like mostly our like core set of genres, but making it completely freely available to stream or to download or whatever for everyone to use. But yeah, up until this point, I am not the one physically performing any of the music. All of that is my community manager. He writes and has a couple of guitarists he works with, and he tracks the drums himself and whatever. But I am currently working on an album of like ambient drone kind of cinematic-y stuff that I wanted for a video and was like, I don't want to just use someone's stuff. And so I happen to have like some music hardware from where I tinker around because I'm nerdy. I'm into like, I have like synthesizer stuff back here. Like I'm trying to learn this stuff. And so I was just like, I purchased a subscription to Ableton. I'm like, I want to sit down and learn this. And so I made a track that I wanted for a specific video project, and he really liked it, and we're cleaning it up and stuff. And so I'm going to make like an album of that. And so that will be the first one that I am the actual like creator of. But it's all just kind of in our partnership for making it available for everyone to use. And so it's not for everyone, like right tool for the right job. Not every video is going to want synthwave or rock or whatever, but like for a lot of it, and for a lot of our viewers who share similar aesthetic, interests or whatever, it has appealed to a lot of people because it was a very big gap in the market with regards to like no one was making this.
I love that so much. Yeah, and I'm in the exact same boat. And I think it was the UMG thing that really kind of like shook me quite a bit, because as much as they're not sponsoring this episode, I promise, but as much as I love Epidemic and like use the crap out of it, break out the stems, what if one day it just wasn't an option? Like my entire discography goes bye-bye. And so, yeah, similar to you.
And that was even an issue with YouTube's library. Like YouTube has their little sound library. Hey, yeah.
I have all of this from a past life, and I was like, I'm going to try. And I've been scoring a couple of things, and it's bad. I'm rusty, but I'm having fun with it. And I think my next video has a song I made that is real rudimentary, but I was like, hey, let's just throw it in there and have fun. So
yeah, and I mean, if it's a background track, like people aren't listening to it with the same ear they were if it were like on Spotify in their ears or whatever. Like you just kind of need a vibe. You don't need a full song a lot of the time. And so that's what I learned a lot when I was learning. I've only done the one thing so far, but like learning Ableton and trying to figure that out is like, it was really cool to process. Like I could just take this layer of the song, like that's what inspired me to make this and like do the ambient kind of thing in the first place. Was I was writing a script. It's actually funny enough, like a 2-year review of my main camera, and I wanted like some mysterious vibes and then some happy vibes, and like I was just like, I could just take this layer of it and then bring up this other layer whenever I'm not done talking or whatever. And I was just like,
yep. I think I don't know. There's so much there that people are going to, I think, start tapping into, because I think it is pretty incredible how simple it can be and how much it can enhance, right? And it's like, okay, like obviously we appreciate and respect all of the people that spent hours and hours on this song, but I can get a feeling with a couple of notes and a couple of different sounding instruments, and that's really all I need, right? Like it's the marriage of all of those things that helps tell the story. So,
and like I've been someone who has a bad track record of just slapping a background song underneath everything and not catering it to the video. And a lot of that's due to time. A lot of that's due to just like, I reach a point where I'm like creatively overwhelmed and I'm like, I can't keep hacking at this anymore. So like, here's some background music, when arguably a lot of the time there just shouldn't have been any in the first place. Like maybe in the intro and the outro, but like, I'm at the point where I'm like, really educational stuff probably doesn't need music most of the time because it's just distracting and like whatever. But like I spent a lot of my career just kind of putting music on there because it's all I could figure out, like had the headspace. I didn't make time or room for it. And so now I'm trying to like swing hard in the opposite direction where I'm like catering everything towards what I want you to feel when you're watching it. And again, that doesn't always work. Like if it's just a tutorial, like I don't want you to feel anything. I want you to shut up and listen. So I just need to not have any. But
which is so tough. And I think, again, talking about the influence of just like the spaces we've grown up in, like OG YouTube, that was the meta. You had to have music, which again, it's like, I don't know why. I don't know who started that and how it latched on. I have no idea. But like when you watch, I mean, even like a Matt Diavella video, I would say is a textbook example of this, where it's like the music comes in to enhance part of the story. But if he's just talking about something, it almost always cuts. It almost always fades out and you just don't even notice. But if you're really paying attention, you go, oh my gosh, there's no music here. And of course there isn't. Like, it's not important right now. And yeah, just like you, I think that restraint and trying to bring in a track for a specific purpose is really, really fantastic. So
I wonder if it has to do with like how much better and easier it's gotten to have good audio quality. Because I know for me early on, I was often using music as a crutch to like hide a noise floor. Because like I would often record with, you know, background noise in my microphone and like you wouldn't notice it if I put the music there. But then if the music stops, you notice it. And so I'm wondering if it's because it's gotten so easier from everything to your Rode wireless mics to whatever, like good audio is so easy now, whereas it seemed like such a black art in the early days. Like maybe we're finally at the point where we're comfortable hearing our mics without added stuff.
Yeah, the fact that I can take this little cube's audio and throw voice isolation on it and it sounds good is stupid, right? No, that is a awesome theory. I actually think you're spot on because I totally again, you're pulling latent memories from me as well, where it's like I forgot, like, oh yeah, the noise floor was just crap. It's this crazier time.
I remember I've been doing a bunch of data recovery recently on old drives because just to try to get some old stuff back that I didn't take care of or keep before. And I found some of my very first attempts at recording a podcast from like 2003. And I was recording this on I don't think I had a webcam microphone at this point, so I'm pretty sure, I don't have it in here. I was using the mic on an MP3 player and just like holding it as I walked around. And like at one point, it starts getting really staticky and annoying, like this weird, just like really annoying piercing static in the background. And then that goes away and I just start sounding like a robot bunny or something. And like I just committed to it. And then I sent it to someone like who ran a podcast at the time and like tried to get feedback from it via email. And they're just like, yeah, if I wasn't giving you feedback, I don't think I could just sit here and listen to this the whole time because there's all this static and stuff. And it's just like back in the early YouTube days, like podcasting was already like kind of professional even back then. But in the YouTube days, no one edited anything. Like, especially in the gaming scene or like the early vlog scene, it didn't matter if your mom came in and yelled at you or whatever. Like, everyone just left that in and was just like, all right, sorry, guys, I'm back. Okay, what was I talking about? We're talking about blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, why did no one think to just cut that out? Why did no one think to just, like, clean it up? Like, it's crazy how much the standards just push what seems like basic common sense. But until it becomes standard, you don't think about it.
That's so true and so funny. Oh, my gosh.
Whenever people talk about the millennial pause at the start of videos, and, like, all it is people like all it is we're making sure it's recording before we stop talking. And like we came to that because we grew, you know, we come from a wave of anything could go wrong when you start a video and you want to make sure it's actually recording you before you start recording the video. And people are like, why would you do that? It's recording. You don't need to wait. Just go. And it's like, it didn't always do that.
It was not.
You could hit record and then it'd say air 2 seconds in or, you know, whatever.
It was not a given. Oh, to be alive when that is a given. What a crazy time. Yeah. Okay. Another question that I have to ask about, otherwise I will kick myself if you run away before I get to it, is the studio that you have. Is there a backstory there? What is going on? I love everything about it. And I mean, you can probably guess why. It feels just as you as what I've got going on with my shed. And I just want to know more about the studio.
So it's always weird when someone compliments it because I'm always looking at like the next evolution and I'm just like, no, it's not good enough. But like being honest, like this is what I always wanted. I grew up making videos in my bedroom with my not made bed and clothes all over the floor in the background and whatever. And like I always wanted a dedicated space. Eventually, after a couple apartments, we got to one where I had like a dedicated bedroom I could dress up and make videos in until our kid was born. And so this is like the final evolution of that. And like ideally I'd have more space in some scenarios, but this is a 2-car garage. And so like 24 by 24 square feet, I think. And so I guess that's not square feet if I'm giving you the dimensions, but you know what I'm saying. And so it's just one big box and it's been a lot of work. We had to, thankfully it was already like, it was a workshop or something before. And so like there was already drywall up with insulation. It's not a well insulated building. Like the AC cost for this during the spring and summer is super expensive because like there's a ton of leakage because it is a garage. But like it already had drywall and power run and insulation. So like it was doable. We had to put in a whole HVAC system. And so all this stuff back here is actually covering that up. Like there's the big column where the heater and furnace or the furnace and AC and stuff is. But like we put in venting and put in HVAC and put down carpet tiles and dressed it up. But like this is me trying to contain all of my interests at once into a single box, which is very difficult and constantly changing. And so at one point it was divided into like quadrants. So like off camera over here is like the gaming corner. So I had my gaming set up, my consoles, all my games and backdrop. And so like it'd be different sets. But I thought I had this master plan where like I'd have a gaming corner, a tech corner, and then that was going to be my arts and crafts corner. And like I'd have this way to segment all of my interests. So when I wanted to focus on something, I just focused on it. But what really happened was I just neglected everything except for my main workstation. And so I've kind of blended it all back towards this way. And so like I can do all my game streaming stuff from here too. And the rest is just kind of set and storage. And so it's just, like I said, me trying to contain my enormous amounts of stuff I've collected from my multiple channels and hobbies and ideas and review samples and everything into one space to try to like make something worthwhile. The overall vibe I'm going for is like an arcade crossed with the video rental store. And some parts of it like achieve that and some of it don't. But like, especially with the lights off and only the like ambience on and stuff, like it's pretty cool.
Totally. No, I love it. And I think, I mean, the reason I was so obviously infatuated is just it feels, I think a lot of, and maybe this is kind of going away, but I do think a lot of studio space is very clean. And I mean, my space is not. It is very lived in, has lots of stuff that is not permanent because everything's changing. And that is like how I like it. And it's been the best thing for my creativity to have a space where that is possible.
It makes sense to keep things like clean and minimal when it is competing for other things. Like if it's your desk in your house when you have kids and pets and whatever, like you want to keep it minimal so no one's breaking it or tripping or whatever. But when you have your own space, you want to live in it. You want to exist.
Yeah. Someone the other day was like, Jake, we need a shed studio tour. And I was like, it's a disaster. And I'm sure this is the fullest form it's ever been in, but it doesn't feel finished to me. So I could make one, but then I'm going to want to make another one in 2 weeks when I come up with some new thing, you know? So
no, I am the same way. And people always say like a cluttered desk is a cluttered mind. And I always just flip that around to like, so is an empty desk an empty mind? I don't want an empty mind. Like to me, like I am so inspired by like Adam Savage and Casey Neistat, like people who clearly do the work all day and want as much efficiency to do the work as possible. Like I want to see what tools you're using and how you're using it and stuff. I don't want to see your empty white desk and a fake plant and tell me that you work all day because I don't know that you do if that's how it's set up. Like I'm always so suspicious of those setups. I'm like, what do you mean you have one monitor, a keyboard, a mouse, and a fake plant, and that's how you run a video empire? I don't believe you. Where's the storage room? Like,
yeah.
Where? No.
Oh, for sure. That just does not. It doesn't seem. Yeah. Gut check. It's not feeling right.
And everyone works different ways. Like I'm not being judgy. It's just for me, this is what works. Is I need everything in front of me and ready to go.
Totally. And that's how I am. And I think maybe the biggest takeaway is like you and I's basically telling the world like, hey, you know, which I mean, Casey's been doing it for years, but I think there's always this kind of dissonance around it of like, I've always felt guilt of like, man, I just can't keep that minimalist setup because for whatever reason, it does not foster my creativity. But like, hey, go crazy with it, because maybe that's what you'll actually love. And I see that in what you've got. And I think that that's cool because, like you said, no shame in clean if that's what works for you, but also no shame in chaos, because sometimes that's what you need. My brain is chaos, and I got to have a space that matches that. So it's
embrace the chaos.
It's chaos. Oh.
I spent quite a few years being like pressured and put down by comments that would ask about that kind of stuff, or be like, you know, why don't you do this or whatever, to the extent that I just kind of rebounded in the opposite direction. And I'm just like, this is how I operate. I can't stand clean, empty walls. Like that's boring. I need stimulation. I need activity. I need whatever. And so
I drilled one monitor into the wall, and I already hate it because I'm always wanting to move stuff around. And like, thankfully it's on a moving arm, so that helps. But that's the thing. Like, and most of my tables can be moved. Like, I'm always shuffling stuff around. So dang. Oh, I love it. Okay, real quick, I want to circle back to a few more editing related questions. Again, I just love all these tangents. The studio one was my favorite so far because that's just speaks to my soul, speaks to my heart. But I've got to ask you, again, as kind of the longer DaVinci nerd, is there some hotkeys or something in that realm that you would recommend to people who are getting started with DaVinci that you think has made a huge difference? And maybe you found it right away, or maybe you found it recently. Like, what is something, again, that's kind of giving you those aha workflow moments of like, whoa, don't sleep on this. You're going to save yourself hours.
My big recommendation has always been, if you're switching from another video editor to a different one, to just remap all the controls you use regularly to match that. And like, Resolve has a sort of Premiere matching preset and a Vegas matching preset or whatever. And for whatever reason, whenever I tried using that, it like didn't match any of the keys I was using in Premiere, so I didn't find it super helpful. But like, one of the biggest hurdles I see people whenever they try switching editors is like not knowing where anything is or not knowing the shortcuts. And it's just like, you can just change it to match what you're used to. Like, standardize your workflow and make the software adhere to that. And so that is the first thing I did. Was there were a few random hotkeys or whatever that I just remapped and resolved to what I was used to in Premiere. And immediately you're like up and running. Most NLEs work the same. Like, you know how to use an NLE if you get past that bump of like, oh, it's new and scary. Like, it works the same. You just got to change that. Honestly, I don't have a whole lot that I've remapped and resolved that I consider to be like super crazy, but there's one, especially for the gamers out there, that has made a huge difference for me. And that is, because I have been gaming on the computer since I'm 9 months old, my hand naturally rests on WASD. And so I remap controls based on that. And so zooming in and out on the timeline, which I do all the time, is S and D. So I can just very quickly, as I'm cutting and doing whatever, zoom in and out to see, because I use that constantly. And then I put ripple delete on F, so that I am always like zooming in and out, hitting F, moving stuff along. And that has sped up my workflow a ton. And I started that at the tail end of me editing in Premiere, and it made a huge difference. And then I picked it up back here in Resolve. And like, having this over here where I need a second hand or to move my hand from my resting space or whatever to zoom in is really cool. Taryn, who used to edit for Linus Tech Tips, is like the big macro guy. He has a thing set up in Premiere where like he just holds control and then like zooms in and out and can do it. Similar kind of workflow, but something to where I would recommend either recording yourself or pulling up a notepad and meticulously note taking everything you notice yourself doing more than like 5 times in a video edit. Whether it's an effect, a task, an action on the keyboard, take a note of that and then really sit with that and try to map out like how you could make that more effective for you. For some people, that's going to be like a shuttle jog. If you use the cut tab, you know, you got the speed editor or whatever. I can't stand the cut tab. I bought that for the Resolve key and then sold off the speed editor just because I could never use it. But whatever actions you're doing, and for me, that was zooming in and out, switching between the blade and the select key, and then ripple deleting. Those are like my most common keyboard things. Mapping those to where you have as little friction to hitting those as possible, and then spending a week or two remapping your muscle memory. Like, that is the big thing for me and like the biggest time saver. Like, of all things, I don't need any crazy keyboard shortcuts. It's just one button to do whatever I'm going to do most often, and that is primarily what I do. I know people can be really fast, like pulling down your footage from the preview monitor to the timeline with hotkeys and doing all that, but I don't. I don't work that way.
That one's funny, actually, because I didn't do that in Final Cut. And then because, again, not coming from track-based editing, I kept pulling stuff down and overwriting it. I basically had to come up with a hotkey for, it's called place on top, right? So it just throws it up in space without overwriting anything, because I just kept messing so much up. I was like, okay, there's got to be some kind of solution here where I can at least press a button and get it down there without ruining stuff, or inserting, same thing. But yeah, it sounds so nerdy, and I think you would agree with it based on everything you just said. But like, and again, this is the editing nerd channel, so hopefully this is not revolting to you. It shouldn't be. But pulling up that, again, I can't remember exactly what it's called, which is embarrassing, but the keyboard shortcut window in DaVinci Resolve, custom keys or whatever it is, pulling that up and looking through, seeing what options there are, thinking about your left hand and how you can map stuff and all of the different configurations, what you use the most, what feels natural. Like, it sounds so freaking nerdy, but I do it all the time. And I would tell anyone, like, do it. Get in there, get nerdy, see what things you have, because you also find stuff that you're like, man, I don't even know what this is. What is that? And it might be absolutely useless to you, or it might be, you know, the button to sync audio, and you're like, oh, that's a great idea. I should have a button to just sync audio in the timeline, because I've been right clicking, going through the menus and pressing it. And it's like, okay, maybe I don't do it that often, but even like recently I just slammed that one on P. It's like, okay, even though it's in my right hand, which I'm always trying to make sure everything's on the left, but it's like, even though it's on the right, that is still less.
It's still faster than the clicks. Yeah,
exactly. So,
and it's intimidating. Like you got to spend some time with it, because there's layers to every key. And then like, you got to find the exact action you want in the right tab or selection. Like, cause there could be like a ripple delete in like 3 different sections, and you got to make sure you're on the one that you want for when you're editing. And like, it's pretty overwhelming. Like, for whatever reason, Resolve's keyboard shortcut interface is way more intense than Premiere's. And so it's like, you got to get used to it, but it is 100% worth it. And then you can save it as a file and back it up. That way, anytime you have to reinstall your computer or re-download Resolve or whatever, like, you never lose track of that.
That stupid little text file is liquid gold to me. And it always is getting updated and saved off into places. Okay, I've got a couple of follow-up questions to the cut page hatred, which I mostly agree with, but also, I don't know, I found a couple of use cases for it that I like recently. Do you have a shortcut for moving your playhead, or is that all clicking? I'm curious about this one, because someone recently told me about that, and I have not done it yet, and I might go start playing around with that.
I don't. It's all clicking and just JKL scrubbing for me.
Okay, JKL. Yep. Yeah, so that's exactly how I've been. And someone was telling me like, oh, well, what about a hotkey to mount, move 5 frames with maybe a shift type thing? And I was like, that's interesting, because, again, whether or not you've used Final Cut, but in Final Cut, there's a feature where there's actually kind of a secondary playhead. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but how in Resolve you move your mouse and can click somewhere and the playhead doesn't move unless it's up in the top little spot. In Final Cut, there's actually kind of this like preview cursor that follows and will actually preview where that is, and then you can click anywhere and it takes you there. It's just like this really effortless mouse existence. And I've always felt like they totally could do that in Resolve and have it be toggled. I don't know why they haven't. They should. But in the meantime, I was like, maybe some shortcuts could help me move around in that regard a little easier. But again, my left hand is so crammed, I'm not sure what I'm going to move around for it. But
that's what the foot pedals are for.
I know, I need some foot pedals. Like flying an airplane.
I know I've seen people, map that with Premiere with like auto hotkey and stuff, but I don't know if there's one for Resolve. See, I'm weird. Like, I don't do a whole lot of editing around the playhead. Like, I know that's a whole philosophy, but like, to me, the playhead is almost irrelevant. Like, if I see a place I want a clip to be, I'm going to drag the clip. I'm not going to try to pull stuff to where the playhead is. I'm just going to move to the frame that I want. And so I'll use markers or whatever to get it there. but I don't give a crap where the playhead is other than for previewing. Like, I am just going to move stuff where I want linearly. But I edit pretty, like, I feel like the traditional right way to do things is very much like inserting clips exactly where the playhead is and like moving it around here and like putting gravity on the playhead for wherever you want to go. And like, I am assembling Legos when I edit.
Yeah. No, that is so fascinating. I love hearing these different perspectives. Again, that's why I do this show. I guess maybe explain that in further detail. I'm so fascinated. So you are like, you're not on the mouse for most of your edit. You're JKLing and so wait, so you said you dragged clips in though. So how are you? How's that working?
Yeah, I am mostly on the mouse for it. So I am dragging instead of trying to automate like pulling clips or effects or whatever to where the mouse is, I am just really fast with the mouse and moving it all myself and using my left hand with the keyboard stuff to speed up wherever the timeline is going. And so like I will be focused on playing it back faster or pausing it as soon as I want something there and then moving it myself and then backing up to like see, do I want it a couple frames back? And then I'll play it from there and be like, okay, let's drag it a couple frames back or whatever. Like I will be nudging it that way, pretty much very cursor based, and just using my hand to navigate or speed up the timeline. And like I'll use it to change the cursor and stuff, but like it is purely my left hand is basically just like holding the picture as my right hand is drawing on it. Throwing even more analogies in here, but yeah, like they're very separate in utility. And so I use most of my keyboard shortcuts with my left hand just because I have like a really tiny keyboard. It's easy for me to just like slide over real quick and hit it.
Looks like a Keychron maybe.
Yep. K3 Slim.
It's in my standing desk setup, but yeah, gotta have small keyboards.
I used to be all about the big ones with the extra screens and the macros and stuff. But like I said, after I switched to Resolve, it's like I just don't need it. Like theoretically, I'd be saving me time if I could just hit a button and it applies an effect that I like here. But I feel like I'm making creatively smarter decisions when I have to deliberately find it and choose it. And like I use favorites and whatever, and I use like power bins for presets and all that stuff. But like I feel like it's almost like, as cringy as people find this to be, the difference between like film photography and digital, like when you have to take the extra steps to ensure you're doing the thing right, you're being more informed about it, where it's way too easy to just like smash a keyboard with a bunch of presets and apply effects everywhere and just not question why you're doing it after so long. And it makes sense if you're doing like daily editing of like the same kind of video for a client or for a job or something every day. Like, yeah, you want that automation pretty locked in. But when I'm making new creative decisions every video, taking the time to actually evaluate and make that decision makes it better.
Oh, so well said. So well said.
I have a question for you.
You've got a question for me?
Yeah. So I've never used Final Cut. I think I toyed with it back in the 7 days, but like I've never been a Mac guy until recently, so I didn't even have access to it most of the time. But like, how hard is it converting from like this to me? The magnetic timeline thing is just complete mumbo jumbo voodoo. Like I do not even begin to wrap my head around it. How hard is it to just like use both?
Initially, very hard. Now, not so hard. Here's the thing.
Because it seems like at its core it might work similarly, but it feels so different. Like I just won't touch it. Like I can't even.
Well, here's what's so cool about it is, and again, I almost hate that I know Final Cut. Like really, in a lot of ways, I wish I just knew Resolve. Like I'm not going to lie to you, because it totally has me living in this realm of like you said, I feel like I'm making so many informed choices because of both of them doing fantastic things and sucking at others, right? And the magnetic timeline always comes up, and it should, because it truly is. I mean, I'm trying to think of another metaphor to explain it, but I truly think it is the quote unquote right answer to editing video. And again, it is what I learned first, but when you really like understand, and here's why I say that. This is the analogy is, and I think I made a video about it and I should probably redo it because I think I could explain it better now, but editing in the magnetic timeline, in my opinion, was the conversion that should have happened when we went to digital, where it's like, this is the digital representation of splicing together film. But it has track-based characteristics where you can glue stuff on top of that film. And when you think about it like that, in my opinion, it is the correct way to assemble a cut, to assemble a video, because you're literally digitally splicing together clips as if it was a roll of film. And then just because of cool technology, you can throw a text on top of that film and it can still happen magically, right? And so I do think it is correct. And the cut page is not the magnetic timeline. Everyone says it's close. It is not even.
No.
It's the closest thing I've seen. It is not the same thing. And so I really do think that it is maybe a missed opportunity that we had with the whole track-based editing. The confusing flip argument to that is I do think that track-based editing with music is correct. It's very mathematical. It's very grid-based, and that makes sense to me in my brain. So it is kind of weird that another medium that relies heavily upon music feels like doesn't quite work properly. But yeah, I don't know. I guess what was the original question? Just like how hard it is to use both. Yeah, it's challenging because it's a completely different paradigm. But I think too, the other flip side to that is under the hood, I guarantee the fundamentals are exactly the same, because a lot of what you can do with different hotkeys, shortcuts, and like thought process, it's the same stuff. Like under the hood in Final Cut, it's probably track-based. They're just doing a lot of stuff graphically to show it differently. But I think that matters. I think the GUI representation changes how we interact with it.
I mean, that's Apple's whole mantra, right? That's their whole design philosophy. It's interesting because I said for a long time, like, there would be no reason or way for me to convert, and like it doesn't make sense to me, and like I'm very rigid in certain things. Like I'm quick to adopt new tools and ideas in some ways, and then in others, like I want stability and things to stay the same. But like I've started to notice in recent years the limitations of interacting like having clips interact with each other between tracks. Like you don't have a way to do that, and specifically even with just something as simple as like transitioning. Like I have an aversion to putting anything other than my A-roll on my first track. I love the non-destructive method of track-based editing, because if I want to trim that up or whatever, like that A-roll is just underneath waiting to be seen. Like it's fine. But then if I want to transition between the A-roll and something else, every transition is really just like blending on top. It's not like, and some of them don't actually work. Like some of the like Red Giant VHS transitions or whatever, like it's supposed to slide the clips between each other or like mesh them together somehow. And that doesn't work when they're not on the same track. And so it's just like a black screen or whatever. And like not having any way to link two tracks or two clips on separate tracks, like I'm starting to see the limitations. And so I've started to get more curious about it. Not enough that I will probably ever use Final Cut anytime soon, but it's gotten me wondering, like maybe that is the way to go. Cause I don't know what the UX like explanation will be to go like, okay, I want the end of this clip to node link up here to this one. Like it would be a mess. And so really struggled to wrap my head around node-based stuff for the longest time, like coming from Premiere and After Effects, going to Resolve, where the color and fusion workflows were nodes. And like, it just broke my brain for the longest time, but now I love it. Like now it's amazing. Now I still struggle with like parallel and layer mixer nodes and like trying to actually do things simultaneously as the workflow is like optimized for. But like, the way nodes actually work when you're doing it right is like way better than layers for most use cases. But it took forever to understand.
Yeah, and that's what I try to like kind of be a little conscious of, because I've actually made that comparison where it's like I feel like the magnetic timeline is what nodes is, where it's like I think this is the right way to do it. But that does come with the caveat of all of my familiarity with it. Again, I'm not new to Resolve. I've used Resolve for a really long time, and I think I take a lot of pride in hopefully being an authority figure who can toe that line honestly, and not just like, oh, I switched, I'm 2 weeks in, let me tell you all about Resolve. It's like, no, I'm to my detriment in love with both of these softwares and argue one way or the other for both of them. So yeah, it's tough, but I do think it is different. And I would say, I mean, if you do have a Mac, and I mean, again, you are of these people, you're of the people who, like, if you're just feeling stuck, like, and you're willing to drop the money on it, it is a one-time purchase and you have it for forever. And like, I mean, play around with it, right? Like that's what I keep telling everyone who's going to Resolve from Final Cut. I'm like, look, there's a free version, so it's even easier. Like, just hop in, just play, you know? Because a lot of times, same way you might want to go shoot film, it's like, just get out of your head a little bit and try something different. And I think that's kept my love for editing right now, is because it's like, if I was stuck in Final Cut, I might be sick of it. But because I can go back and forth, there's a real affinity for both. So
it really stinks that like one of the main differentiating factors between Resolve Free and Resolve Studio is like the thing that would keep people from using it, because it's the decode of your like H.264 and H.265 footage, which is what most people are using. And so you have to do this whole caveat of like, okay, if you're going to try the free one, in order to really understand the experience, you got to transcode everything first and then use it that way, or like because one of the big selling points of Resolve for a lot of people has been the performance difference, but you don't see that in the free version. And so it's really hard to be like, try it before you buy it, because when you try it, you're getting a different engine and like, like it's hard.
Like, even if it was just 1080p or something, like I wish it was almost the exact same. And then maybe some of the effects or studio, or I don't know.
Yeah, I don't mind the effects being separate. Like that makes sense. But when you have no way to know it's just going to perform miles better when you pay $300 and install the other version until you do it. Like there's no way to know that. Like, and so I've had so many people try it and they're like, man, it didn't recognize half my OBS recordings and like it didn't play very well. And I'm like, I know that's not. Oh, I know I promise it's better.
The other big asterisk, which again, hopefully I'm not burning any bridges with Blackmagic. Blackmagic, I think you're pretty fantastic in a lot of ways, but like, okay, it's great that the studio version comes with your cameras, but they are not a good camera for most people, especially beginners. Like, we're all buying Sonys and I guess the new Panasonics myself because they have good autofocus. They have nice, small, compressed file sizes. I love my Pocket 4K. It's a great studio camera, and I'm glad I finally found a use case for it, but I have probably sprouted a few gray hairs with that camera and just thankfully got me Resolve. But other than that, it's not a good camera for so many things. So
at one point in time, I could have been like Blackmagic's biggest fan. Like they are doing some crazy innovation, but the innovation is mostly benefiting customers of everyone else. I feel like my investment in my Ursa Mini Pro when I had it was a really dumb decision, but a really good decision. Like I learned a lot from it. It got me what I wanted for a little bit. But I also feel like it's the most burned I've ever been on a purchase, because I bought it in like late summer, early fall of 2018. Maybe 6 months later, like I think it was December of that year maybe, that they announced the Pocket cameras, which did the same thing with the same quality, same sensors. I mean, it's not the same, but you know, as far as I needed, the same thing for a fraction of the cost and for a fraction of the weight and size. And less than a year later, they announced a G2 of the Ursa Mini Pro that had slow-mo that I wanted and a SSD recording built in. And I kept contacting them. I was like, do you have a trade-up program? Like, what? This ain't cool. You're not even selling the one that I just paid like $6,000 for. What's going on? And like, they don't have anything. And like, they are so fast to iterate right now. Like, I can't imagine being a customer of their little ATEM Mini products, because every few months they have a new, like every slight idea they have for a new feature, they're spinning up a new product for. And it just feels like such a money sink to like get a product that's worthwhile. Whereas I feel like on the other hand, and I don't think they're the right choice for video, but you think about something like Fuji cameras, where while they have a bunch of different models, whatever you're getting is still more or less the culmination of everything they've learned about building cameras up to that point. Like, you are getting everything, just with a slightly different application. Like, maybe you only have, you know, if you got the crazy X106 or whatever, like you only have the fixed focus lens, or you got a flip down screen, but like you have all the latest sensor tech and autofocus tech and whatever like built in, and that is going to be built to last. And it's going to be a few years or a decade before you're like, maybe I need something better. Whereas with Blackmagic, they are just, every new idea is a new product, and you feel burned by the last one, and there's no trade up, there's no whatever. I will say, I had an issue with my XLR ports breaking, and they completely handled it. I had secretly wished that like they couldn't fix it and they would have just like silently upgraded me to the G2 model, but because that's happened with other things. But like they handled warranty stuff like amazingly. But like I felt so burned because within 6 months they had the dream camera that I wanted that didn't exist on the market, just without any tease or news. Like they're just like, bam, we got this thing. And then within a year they had a G2 of this that was significantly better. It was that typical like drive a car off the car lot and it's immediately worth less scene. Whereas most cameras are not that way. Like there's been a lot of cameras where I've sold them years later for pretty close to what I paid for them for because everyone still wants them. Whereas with that, like immediately they come out with something else and it's basically worthless. Like there is no reason outside of like certain like very specific cinematic or like documentary purposes to get an Ursa over the Pocket cameras. Like the Pockets still have XLR, they still have time code, they still have all these things. Like there's very little reason to get an Ursa over the Pockets. And it just felt like I was just with a paperweight all of a sudden. And like I got a lot out of it. It was a workhorse, whatever, but like I wish they would slow down.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. The wish list is pretty long in the camera department. It is pretty wild that like, again, if you pay for the studio version, like Studio Resolve is rarely in this niche, like up there in a tier that's pretty untouchable right now from a sentiment perspective. Not perfect. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it's pretty funny that that same company also makes some cameras that I'm just like, whoa, what is this?
and the software is so cheap and a one-time purchase because they subsidize it with their hardware sales. And it's like, why is the thing that we're not even really paying for so much better than the thing we are paying for?
I think that's, and too, like you said, I think that's why I've maybe pumped the brakes on buying hardware from them for a minute, because especially camera-wise, it's like, I would love to buy another Blackmagic camera, but man, they got to get some stuff right. And they keep missing it, you know, for me at least, for what I need. So for a hot second, I was like, ooh, L-mount Blackmagic. And then I was like, oh, no, I'd rather just get an L-mount camera with autofocus. Well, dude, hey, thank you so much for coming on today. I think we better cut it off there. And again, the invite is out there to come back on again, because I think we're both going to look back at this episode and go, wow, we talked for hours and we hardly touched on half of what we could have. But thank you so much for coming on the show today. Where can we find you, you know, for the people who maybe don't know you, which hopefully is no one, but
oh, I'm sure there's plenty. EposVox, EposVox, pretty much everywhere is the easy mode. If you're interested in the music stuff we talked about, that's backingtrack.gg. But yeah, I'm on basically everything in some form or another.
So cool. Well, hey, thank you so much. And yeah, we'll all catch you guys in the next one. Thanks, everyone.
See ya.